It started as just another late-night trip to Walmart, a seemingly mundane errand for laundry detergent and some snacks. But if I'd known what would happen that night, I wouldn't have stepped a foot outside my door. It was nearly midnight when I arrived. The automatic doors hissed open, and the frigid, artificial air blasted my face as I walked in. Despite the late hour, the store was surprisingly alive with activity, though not in a comforting way. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting uneasy shadows over the aisles. The usual hum of conversation and checkout beeps was subdued, almost drowned out by a strange, persistent static playing faintly over the intercom. That's when I saw the man. He was standing at the end of the cereal aisle, staring at me. His face was obscured by the bill of a greasy baseball cap, and his body was stiff, almost mannequin-like. At first, I thought he might be one of those overly dedicated employees keeping an eye on late-night shoppers, but something about him felt wrong. His head tilted slightly, like he was trying to decide if I was worth following. And then he moved. No, he glided. It wasn't a step, not really. It was as if his feet weren't touching the ground. I blinked hard, convinced I was just overtired. When I opened my eyes, he was gone. I tried to shake it off and headed toward the detergent aisle, my heart hammering a little harder than I liked. As I turned the corner, I noticed something strange. All the aisles seemed longer than usual, impossibly stretching into the distance. The signs marking their contents were in strange, mismatched fonts, and some were written backward or upside down. A chill prickled at the back of my neck. I shook my head and rubbed my eyes, telling myself it was just my imagination. Maybe I was overthinking it, just one of those weird late-night Walmart quirks. But as I walked down the detergent aisle, the oppressive silence became deafening. No more faint static from the speakers, no footsteps from other shoppers, no distant beeps from the registers. Just silence. The air felt heavier, almost suffocating. I glanced down at the shelves to grab a bottle of detergent, but something was off. The labels on the bottles were blurred, the words unintelligible, like someone had smeared the ink. I picked one up, only to find the weight was wrong. It felt far too heavy for such a small bottle. I turned it over and almost dropped it. The bottom wasn't sealed. It was open and filled with a thick, black liquid that dripped onto the floor in slow, deliberate splats. I placed it back on the shelf and stepped away, my pulse racing. That's when I heard it. A faint shuffling sound, coming from somewhere behind me. I froze, my instincts screaming to run, but my legs refused to move. The shuffling grew louder, closer. "Hello!" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. I turned my head slowly, trying to glimpse whatever was approaching, but the aisle behind me was empty. Completely empty. Yet the sound continued, echoing in a way that didn't make sense. It was as if the source was all around me, closing in. I forced myself to move, walking quickly toward the other end of the aisle. My sneakers squeaked against the floor, the noise cutting through the unnatural stillness. As I reached the corner, a loud crash shattered the silence behind me. I whipped around and saw the detergent bottles toppling off the shelves one by one, almost as if something unseen was barreling through them. My fight-or-flight instinct finally kicked in. I bolted out of the aisle and toward the center of the store, my chest heaving. I needed to find someone, anyone, who could tell me I wasn't losing my mind. But as I ran, I realized something horrifying. Every aisle I passed was empty. No workers, no shoppers. The store was deserted. "Is anyone here?" I yelled, my voice echoing eerily in the vast space. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darted between the shelves in the electronics section. Relief surged through me. Someone else was here. I sprinted toward the section, my heart pounding in my ears. When I turned the corner, I froze in my tracks. The man in the baseball cap was standing there, facing away from me, his body rigid. He was holding something in his hand, a DVD case, I think, but his head was tilted at an unnatural angle, almost as if it were hanging loosely from his neck. "Hey!" I said, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. I took a cautious step forward. That's when I saw the reflection in one of the blank TV screens mounted on the wall. His face wasn't human. It was pale, featureless, with hollow pits where eyes should have been. And then, ever so slowly, his head began to turn. Not his body, just his head, swiveling all the way around to face me. I ran. I sprinted blindly through the aisles, my shoes squeaking on the slick tile floor. Every corner I turned felt like a labyrinth designed to keep me trapped. The shelves seemed taller now, their contents warped, cereal boxes with no names, cans of soup with faces etched into the labels, each one contorted in agony. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder, flickering erratically, plunging parts of the store into moments of complete darkness. I couldn't shake the sensation of being followed. Every time I dared glance over my shoulder, I saw fleeting glimpses of shadows darting behind me, too quick and shapeless to identify. My lungs burned as I pushed forward, the air in the store feeling colder with every step. Finally, I saw the glowing Walmart sign hanging above the checkout lanes, promising salvation. The exit was just beyond it. But when I reached the registers, I stopped dead in my tracks. The man in the baseball cap was there, standing in the middle of the self-checkout area. This time he wasn't alone, for other figures surrounded him, their bodies unnaturally still. They all wore the same faded uniforms, their name tags smeared with something dark and wet. Each of their heads hung limply to one side, as if their necks couldn't support the weight. "Please," I croaked, my voice barely audible. "I just want to leave." The man tilted his head toward me, and the others moved in unison, their heads snapping upright. The sound of their necks cracking echoed through the store. I stumbled backward as they began to move, not walking but gliding toward me, their feet barely skimming the ground. The lights above them flickered faster, bathing the scene in strobe-like flashes. Every time the lights went out and came back on, they were closer. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I turned and bolted down the nearest aisle, weaving through displays and overturned carts. Somewhere behind me, I heard their low, guttural voices, whispering things I couldn't understand. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. Stay with us." Their voices overlapped, each one more distorted than the last, like a broken radio trying to tune in to different stations. I clamped my hands over my ears and kept running, desperate to drown them out. I found myself in the back of the store, where the employee-only doors stood slightly ajar. A pale, flickering light spilled out into the aisle. I didn't think twice. I pushed through the doors, my breath hitching as I stepped into the cold, metallic space of the stockroom. The air was damp, the smell of mildew thick and cloying. Stacks of pallets loomed like sentinels, their contents wrapped in tattered plastic. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint hum of machinery, but the space was eerily quiet otherwise. That's when I noticed the mirrors. They were scattered throughout the stockroom, leaning against the walls and perched precariously on pallets. They weren't like normal mirrors, though. Their surfaces shimmered like liquid mercury, distorting the reflections into grotesque, twisted images. I stepped closer to one, drawn by some sick curiosity, and froze. The reflection wasn't mine. In the glass, I saw the man in the baseball cap. His hollow eyes stared back at me, his lips curled into a sinister grin that spread too wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. His hand reached out toward the glass, pressing against it as if trying to break through. Behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate. I spun around, but no one was there. The stockroom was empty, save for the rows of pallets and the flickering light overhead. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. One of the mirrors rippled, and a hand emerged from its surface, followed by an arm. The man in the baseball cap was stepping out of the glass, his body twisting and cracking as he pulled himself free. I stumbled backward, tripping over a pallet and landing hard on the cold, concrete floor. He loomed over me, his shadow stretching impossibly long across the stockroom. "You're not supposed to leave," he rasped, his voice like gravel grinding against metal. I scrambled backward on the cold concrete, my palms scraping against the rough surface as I tried to put distance between me and the thing stepping out of the mirror. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. The air grew colder, and a faint smell of rot wafted from his direction, making my stomach churn. "Stay," he hissed, his voice echoing strangely, as though more than one person were speaking. "This place, it's yours now." "No!" I shouted, finally finding my voice. I staggered to my feet and bolted deeper into the stockroom, dodging stacks of pallets and racks of unopened merchandise. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed violently, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow that made every shadow stretch and writhe as if alive. Behind me, I could hear the faint tap-tap-tap of footsteps. No glides, as if whatever was following me wasn't bound by gravity. Every few seconds, there was a low, guttural whisper, words that I couldn't quite make out but felt deep in my bones, like a threat. I stumbled into a dead-end corner of the stockroom. Metal shelving units towered around me, stacked with boxes of unsold goods. My breathing was ragged, and my head darted around, searching for an escape route. That's when I saw it. A service ladder leading up to the catwalks above. I didn't think, I just moved. My hands gripped the cold metal rungs as I climbed, my legs trembling with every step. Below me, the shadows swirled, growing darker and more solid, as if something massive was taking shape. I didn't look down. Couldn't. I focused on the next rung, then the next, until I hauled myself onto the narrow catwalk above. The view from up there was disorienting. The mirrors were everywhere, scattered across the stockroom floor, each one angled differently so that their reflections bounced and overlapped. I saw myself dozens of times, warped and fragmented. But in some of the reflections, I wasn't alone. The man in the baseball cap was there, standing impossibly close in one mirror, then several feet away in another. He was in all of them, his hollow eyes locking onto mine no matter which way I turned. My chest tightened as I realized he wasn't just in the mirrors anymore. He was using them. Then, I saw movement in the mirror directly below me. My own reflection grinned at me. Not a normal grin, but a twisted, malicious one. It raised a hand and pointed to something behind me. I whipped around, my heart pounding, and nearly lost my balance. The man in the baseball cap was standing at the other end of the catwalk, his head cocked at an unnatural angle. He didn't move, but I could feel the malice radiating off him like heat from an open flame. "This place is hungry," he rasped, his voice sending chills down my spine. "And now you've fed it." I backed away, my foot catching on a loose metal grate. The clang echoed through the cavernous space. He tilted his head further, almost as if in curiosity, and then began moving toward me. Not walking, but gliding, his feet barely touching the metal. Panic set in. I turned and ran along the catwalk, the structure creaking under my weight. Below, the mirrors seemed to pulse with light, their surfaces rippling as if something inside them was straining to break free. The man's rasping voice followed me, growing louder and more distorted. "You can't leave. You're already part of it." I reached the far end of the catwalk and found another ladder, this one leading down to a different section of the stockroom. Without thinking, I swung onto it and slid down, landing hard on the floor below. Pain shot through my ankle, but I forced myself to keep moving. Ahead, I saw a fire exit, an actual, glowing exit sign above a steel door. Hope surged in my chest as I limped toward it. The whispers behind me grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of unintelligible words. I reached the door and shoved it open, expecting the freezing night air to hit my face. Instead, I stumbled into darkness. No parking lot, no streetlights, just an empty void. I turned back to the door, but it was gone, replaced by a blank wall. The whispers stopped. Silence enveloped me, thick and oppressive. Then, a single voice spoke, clear and chilling. "You belong to Walmart now." I stood frozen, staring into the oppressive void around me. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, and my pulse pounded in my ears. The voice, low, chilling, and far too close, seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You belong to Walmart now." The words repeated in my head, each syllable hammering into my thoughts like nails into a coffin. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but something deep inside, the raw instinct to survive, forced me to keep moving. If I stayed still, I knew whatever had spoken those words would come for me. I turned, searching for anything solid, any sign of the world I had left behind. That's when I noticed the faint glimmer of light in the distance. It flickered like a dying bulb, but it was anything, better than the crushing darkness surrounding me. I started toward it, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the void. The ground beneath me felt solid but wrong, like smooth, polished stone that absorbed every ounce of warmth. With each step, the light grew brighter, until I could make out its source. Another Walmart aisle. The shelves were fully stocked, but not with anything recognizable. The products were warped, twisted versions of things I'd seen before. Cereal boxes with gaping mouths instead of logos. Soda bottles filled with a red, viscous liquid that seemed to pulse. And the signs above the aisles weren't in English anymore. They were in some other language, symbols that seemed to shift and squirm when I tried to focus on them. Still, the aisle felt tangible, real. I had no choice but to follow it. As I walked, the faint sound of movement reached my ears. It was soft at first, like fabric brushing against fabric, but it grew louder with each step. I stopped and listened, my heart thudding painfully against my ribs. The sound was coming from ahead, just around the corner of the next aisle. I crept forward, my hands trembling. When I turned the corner, I froze. A group of people stood there, their backs to me. They were wearing Walmart uniforms, but the fabric was frayed, hanging in tatters. Their bodies were stiff, their heads tilted at impossible angles, just like the man in the baseball cap. None of them moved, but I could hear faint whispers coming from them. Words I couldn't understand but felt deep in my chest. Then one of them turned. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes. There were no eyes, just dark, empty sockets that seemed to pull at me, drawing me in. Her mouth opened, impossibly wide, and a garbled voice spilled out. "Why are you here?" I stumbled backward, bumping into a shelf. The others turned at the sound, their hollow eyes locking onto me. One by one, they began to move, shuffling closer with jerky, unnatural movements. "Wait, please," I shouted, my voice breaking. "I don't belong here. I just came for detergent." They didn't stop. Their movements quickened, their arms outstretched as if to grab me. I turned and ran, weaving through the warped aisles, my heart pounding harder with each passing second. The whispers followed me, growing louder, overlapping until they were a deafening roar. "You can't leave. You can't leave. You can't leave." My vision blurred, tears streaming down my face as I sprinted toward the flickering light at the end of the aisle. It grew brighter, almost blinding, until I had to shield my eyes. I threw myself toward it, desperate for escape, and then I was outside. I fell onto cold asphalt, gasping for air. The parking lot stretched out before me, empty and silent. The Walmart loomed behind me, its fluorescent lights glaring down like watchful eyes. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but when I turned toward the store, I saw them, the man in the baseball cap and the others, standing just inside the automatic doors, watching me. Their faces were blank, their hollow eyes locked onto mine. "You'll be back," the man said, his voice carrying through the air like a sinister promise. "They always come back." The doors hissed shut, and the lights in the store flickered out, plunging the building into darkness. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I staggered to my car, started the engine, and sped out of the parking lot without looking back. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that I didn't really escape. Sometimes, when I walk past a mirror or a reflective surface, I catch a glimpse of that man's hollow eyes staring back at me. And late at night, when I pass a Walmart, I swear I can hear the faintest whisper. "You belong to Walmart now." I stood there, frozen in the pitch-black void, my breath ragged and shallow. My fingers grazed the wall where the door had been, but there was nothing. No seam, no handle, just cold, featureless metal. The oppressive silence bore down on me like a physical weight, making it hard to think. Then the void began to shift. Faint shapes emerged, like shadows in a fog, flickering in and out of focus. Shelves appeared, lined with indistinct products, stretching endlessly into the dark. The fluorescent lights buzzed to life one by one, but their light was dim and sickly, casting everything in an otherworldly glow. I realized with growing dread that I was still in Walmart, or some twisted version of it. "Help!" I shouted, the sound echoing strangely, as if the space were much larger than it seemed. "Someone, please." My voice faded, swallowed by the vastness. The silence returned, but only for a moment. A faint, rhythmic tapping broke the stillness, coming from somewhere deep within the aisles. It was slow and deliberate, like the sound of a single shoe tapping against the floor. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. "Who's there?" The tapping stopped. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint any sound, any movement. Then, faintly at first, I heard it, a low, guttural chuckle. It echoed from all around me, as if the walls themselves were laughing. "Welcome back," the voice rasped, unmistakably familiar. I turned slowly and saw him, the man in the baseball cap. He stood at the end of the aisle, his form flickering like a distorted image on an old TV. His head tilted again, unnaturally far, and he started gliding toward me. I didn't wait to see what he would do. I ran. The aisles seemed to shift as I moved, twisting and elongating, leading me in circles. The products on the shelves morphed as I passed, familiar items turning into grotesque, unrecognizable shapes. Boxes of cereal with gaping mouths, bottles of soda leaking something viscous and black. "No exit," the man's voice echoed, deep and resonant, filling the space. "No escape." I turned a corner and nearly collided with a mirror. It was one of the same warped mirrors from the stockroom, its surface rippling like liquid mercury. For a moment, I thought I saw myself reflected in it, but then I realized it wasn't me. It was him. The reflection reached out, its hand pressing against the glass. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, and the glass began to shatter. I stumbled backward as the man emerged from the mirror, his form stretching and contorting unnaturally as he pulled himself free. "No!" I screamed, my voice raw with terror. I turned and ran again, my legs burning, my lungs on fire. The shelves around me collapsed, crashing to the floor in a cacophony of noise. I didn't dare look back. Finally, I saw something ahead, a flickering light, brighter than the rest. As I drew closer, I realized it was another door, an emergency exit, glowing faintly in the distance. My heart leapt. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the pain in my ankle, the tightness in my chest. The man's voice grew louder behind me, a cacophony of whispers and guttural laughter. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, but I didn't stop. I reached the door and grabbed the handle, throwing it open with all my strength. Brilliant white light flooded the space, momentarily blinding me. I stumbled through, falling to the cold asphalt outside. When I looked back, the door was gone. There was no sign of Walmart, just an empty parking lot bathed in the dim glow of streetlights. The oppressive silence was replaced by the distant hum of traffic, the world feeling normal again. But as I stood there, catching my breath, I noticed something on my arm. A small, faint barcode etched into my skin, like a tattoo. It hadn't been there before. And then I heard it, the faintest whisper, carried on the wind. "See you soon." That night, I promised myself I'd never set foot in a Walmart again. But deep down, I know it doesn't matter. It wasn't just a store. It was something else, something alive. And no matter how far I run, I can feel it watching, waiting, because somehow, some way, I belong to it now.